Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Teacher Talks. My name is Ben Barber. I am your host for the show. Today, I am so excited because I am talking to someone that I have gotten to know a little bit over the last year and a half, I think. And I'm excited to get to know a little bit more and a little bit deeper today. He is many things. I want to get a specific title from him and more information, but he is the Director of Christian Formation at Mystic Congregational Church, UCC, in Mystic, Connecticut. I almost said Mystic, Rhode Island. I don't know why. Reverend Aidan Kelley. Aidan, how are you?
I'm good, Ben. Thank you for having me and for inviting me into conversation.
Thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Mystic Congregational Church?
Sure. So I serve as the Director of Faith Formation at the church. And my coming to the church is the first time this role has existed in our particular congregation. Formerly, staffing-wise, we had an associate minister and a director of Christian education. So this position sort of grew out of the church's desire to see faith formation from a lifespan approach and to really sort of build out thinking about faith formation from a holistic perspective in the life of the church. So what I do sort of under that umbrella falls into the Sunday school program that we offer on Sunday mornings, as well as the youth ministry and youth programming. I work with Pastor Krista, our senior pastor, in piloting the confirmation program for our 9th and 10th graders. And then all of the sort of adult faith formation umbrella from Lenten programming to faith and film program that we started during the pandemic that has been continued and been a great source of conversation for our congregation. So many different things, including some Sunday morning leadership with giving the weekly children's messages during our Sunday worship.
I love your weekly children's messages. They are always fantastic. I love you incorporate children's books quite a bit. Every at least I don't know once a month, once every 6 weeks or so. What sort of approach, because there were different times when I was going to church growing up and which is the last time that I probably focused on a children's message before producing church. Like sometimes it felt like the children's message was just completely thrown together at the last minute. Sometimes it felt like it was on the topic of what the sermon was about later that day and whatever the liturgy was. Like, how do you craft your children's messages? Because they're wonderful every time.
Thank you. I begin with looking at the lectionary. In our congregation, we're very lectionary focused in terms of our preaching and our worship design. And so Pastor Krista and I usually have a chat in the beginning of the week and sort of hone in on what our focus is going to be scripturally. And then I sort of build out from there. So I'll look if often we're choosing the gospel lesson as our focus for sort of the scripture and the liturgy. And I'll read the scripture. There are a number of resources online that are just great partners in youth and children ministry. So I usually have a few places I visit. StoryPath is a great resource that is the source of a lot of the books that I share in my children's messages. They have a whole library now, archived years back, of lectionary-based suggestions based on the scriptures each Sunday morning. So that's where I sort of begin. And oftentimes the choice to offer a book as opposed to sort of a message or a conversation with the kids on a Sunday morning, it just sort of comes from whatever emerges from the scripture. Oftentimes we'll be talking about scripture that isn't heard in the same way for children that it would be heard for the larger congregation. And to sort of unpack some of those themes or theological perspectives, I often feel like storytelling is the best way to do that. So usually in those circumstances, I'll turn to a children's book to help sort of get at some of those themes in a way that's accessible for kids. And I like to have fun with them. I think it's a great opportunity to inject some sort of lighthearted humor and fun in the service. And I think it's a great opportunity to invite our children to participate in our worship services. So one of the great joys of being back together in person is to get to interact with the kids. So often I have an idea or a concept for a children's message, and it takes shape throughout the week. And I'll sort of imagine it as I'm driving down from Rhode Island to Mystic on a Sunday morning. And then it sort of changes depending on what kids we have there, how the kids respond to sort of the introduction and the questions I may ask of them. But I really enjoy the creative challenge of taking scripture and thinking about it through a child's lens. And also as an adult, really gained a lot from often just sort of pinpointing a main focus in the scripture or the Sunday worship and sort of opening up into questions and prayer.
I love it. What got you into ministry? What made you want to become a pastor and do what you do?
It's a long story, but it sort of began.
We have time.
Okay.
We have time. You take as much time as you want.
Yeah, it began just growing up in the church. My parents were very involved, and I grew up in a United Methodist church, and the church we went to was in Winchester, Massachusetts, Crawford Memorial United Methodist Church, and spent my childhood growing up in that church, and really thought of my church as a second family, and sang in the boys' choir, and my mother spent some time essentially in my role leading the Sunday school program at that church. So church life was a big part of my upbringing, and I always tell our kids, our confirmands, that during the sermon portion of our service, we had a balcony in our congregation, and all the sort of middle school, senior high aged kids would sit up there. And once it became sermon time, we would head down to the basement where there used to be a nursery school and just run wild during the worship service. And at some point, I stopped doing that, and I stuck around for the sermons, and I started to really learn how to receive sermons, because I think it is a discipline and it takes some practice to sort of listen to sermons and take them in and make them meaningful in our own lives. And somewhere around middle school, high school, I started really feeling a strong sense of calling to ministry that was affirmed by my congregation. People would always say, when are we going to see you back here behind the pulpit? And had a really charismatic and supportive pastor in our church at the time, where I was sort of coming of age faith-wise, who really encouraged me. And that call has really never gone away. There have been parts of my life since then where I really struggled with it, and felt like I was not cut out for it, felt like my faith perspective did not fit into the sort of Christian narrative at different times. And seminary, one of the classes that first resonated me with was a class called Atheisms and Theologies. And really that class really helped me to think about my faith perspective and to think about it in conversation with really thoughtful atheists and with Christian mystics as a part of that conversation. And so my initial call to ministry, for me, it's always been a tension, because it's sort of, public ministry goes against everything that I am as sort of a natural human being. I'm introverted by nature. I'm private and quiet. Sort of my house is my comfort space. And so the sort of interesting thing about being called to ministry is that it pulls me out of my comforts and sort of where I would place myself naturally, or where my energy is naturally. But I find when I step into that space, God's there to meet me, and it really pulls out a lot of the things that I'm gifted at, but sort of sometimes need a little drawing out to access, which is sort of a funny thing about ministry. So when I went to seminary after working at the Williams Mystic Maritime Studies program at Mystic for a year after undergraduate, I went to Boston University School of Theology for seminary, and continued just sort of that discernment process. And when I moved to Rhode Island, I started volunteering at Brown University at their chapel. And through that, the chaplain there, Janet Cooper Nelson, was a member at Central Congregational Church in Providence, Rhode Island. and they were looking for an interim youth ministries coordinator. I forget what the title was at that time. But I first thought, I don't know if I'm really meant to work in the church, and I didn't follow through. And then a couple of weeks later, Janet Cooper Nelson said, "Hey, did you ever email, the minister at Central Congregational Church?" And I said, "No, I didn't, but I'll do it." And that led to some great conversations. And I served there for 5 years, and I was ordained at that church. And then I found my way back to Mystic because I have a connection to the place. Because I did the Women's Mystic program as a student and then worked there as a missions counselor for a year after undergrad. And I really liked the call, the description of the congregation when I was looking for sort of my next placement.
Yeah.
What I love doing in ministry is teaching and facilitating conversation and exploring questions of our faith. And so I'm drawn to sort of the more teaching side of ministry. And I love that the congregation was trying to create a multi-generational lifespan approach to faith formation, because I think that's so vital for the church. And just have been so blessed to have found this congregation that has been so wonderful for me and for my family and for my ministry. And just feel really blessed to have found it right before the pandemic started. And so it's been interesting how our experience of the pandemic, both personally and as a congregation, has sort of shaped this position, because it is so new for the church.
Right.
So
how long before the pandemic did you join Mystic?
I started, I think, late October 2019. So I'd been there.
So you had 6 months,
something like that.
Like maybe 6 months, little under 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. I find it fascinating. I never would have made this connection before this conversation. But you remind me a lot of in the way that you approach ministry, of my pastor for the last 15 years at a Baptist church in Rhode Island, who is very thoughtful and definitely likes the teaching aspect of it, and likes to dive into the theology and to ask those questions. As a matter of fact, I believe he's starting a show called A Question of Faith, which is a literal phrase that you used 5 minutes ago. And John and I have been terrific friends for the last 15 years. So much of the story and of everything that you just said, and specifically like the types of struggles that you had, and all of that stuff reminds me so much of that. And I'm like, I think this is why I've liked Aidan so much for the last 2 years. Tell me a little bit about the film, the Faith in Film series that you started doing during the pandemic, because you mentioned that earlier. I did not know about that, and that sounds very interesting to me.
Yeah, so that sort of grew out of the first sort of creative thought processes that we were doing as a ministry staff, as a team, to address sort of how we can be connected and gather in the midst of the very early days of the pandemic. And how do we continue to offer programming and opportunities to connect when we can't be together in person? And so the model sort of emerged to me of watching films that have some sort of faith connection. Sometimes they're very explicitly spiritual or faith-based or Christian-centric. Oftentimes they're not, but they have some touch points that we can take and have in conversation with our faith. So each month, often I pick a film. I ask for suggestions as well. So we have sort of a running list, and we'll watch the film independently and on our own time, wherever it's sort of convenient for each of us. And then we gather on Zoom. We're still gathering on Zoom, even this month. And we meet usually on a weekday night for an hour or so. And I create a little slideshow that I share my screen for. We use Zoom as a platform. We begin by watching the trailer of whatever movie we watch to sort of bring us back into that cinematic space. And then usually I'll have some guiding discussion questions, but often the conversation just sort of flows and we share our responses to the movie, and how it's connected to our faith and what themes sort of emerge from it. I'm always been a big movie fan, big film fan, and it connects to sort of my belief in the power of stories as great conversation partners and ways for us to engage questions, right? But also shared experiences that we can connect with one another through. So we watched a whole, I was been meaning we need to have like a faith and film award show now because we watch so many movies. But we've watched like Babette's Feast. Have you ever seen Babette's Feast? That's always one that stands out to me. That's a great one. It's from the 80s and it's a Danish sort of period piece. It brings in these really mystical sort of sacred dimensions of food into conversation, which for a Christian tradition, food and worship and faith has always been deeply connected. So that was a really powerful one. We've watched some films that are sort of very obscure. Like we watched this movie called Jesus of Montreal, which was a Canadian film in the 1980s. It's in French, but it's it's the most powerful film I've seen about Jesus's life. And it's this movie about this French-Canadian drama troupe that is commissioned to put on a passion play at a Catholic church. And the story of how they reinterpret the Gospels and put on this play becomes very controversial. And so sort of the lives of the actor who plays Jesus and the other actors in the troupe who sort of take shape as the disciples and Mary Magdalene sort of parallel the Jesus story and retell it in a way that's really compelling. It was really led to a great conversation.
That's awesome.
But I'm a big sci-fi fan, so we watched a couple sci-fi movies like Contact. We talked about, our sort of place in the universe, and it's been really interesting. And one of the interesting things about meeting on Zoom, you would think it's sort of it's less personal, it's more impersonal and disconnected, but something about seeing one another in our homes, which we hadn't had the opportunity to do before prior to the pandemic, really. And to just gather in a very casual way and to see one another in our context that we live on a day-to-day basis really led to some deep connection. And I think we all got to know each other in a way that we hadn't known each other up until that point. So we've continued to meet on Zoom, in part because we're trying to make it accessible for all, but also because we've enjoyed that sort of intimate dimension of it in a funny way.
Well, it also is, it's also interesting because like you said earlier in the interview, that your comfort space is your house, right? Like you're an introvert and you're like, this is where you feel comfortable, or that is where you feel comfortable. So I'm more willing to do a movie night discussion and have those conversations and I'm more comfortable sitting at this desk or sitting over on a couch or like whatever and having that chat with people than I am like getting up and going to the church and sitting on a folding chair at a folding table.
Right.
Like it's nice. There are benefits to this. And when you're able to have both things, then it's really beautiful. You know what I mean? Like when you're able to have the coffee hours and you're able to be at church and worship and do those things. And then also like, have Bible studies and film studies and casual catch-ups and conversations and quick meetings and things like where you don't have to drive 20 minutes to have a meeting. Like it's beautiful.
Right.
And I think that's awesome. What are you what are your hopes for the future for Mystic and for yourself in general and for your faith journey, etc.?
Well, I think we're just in such an interesting place for the church, not only our church, but sort of the church worldwide and church in America. And it's a time that I think is it can be seen as scary as we're seeing or talking about decline and the church's relevance in society and in conversation with, all the other influences that we have in our time and energy in our lives and in families' lives. But I think it's really a time of opportunity and a time to see where the Spirit leads us and to be creative. And I think one of the things that the pandemic taught us and that we talk about a lot in our church is that we can handle change and we can do things differently, because for so long that it felt really hard to do in the church. And our experience early in the pandemic forced us into a lot of changes that we had maybe been talking about or thinking about or trying some things that we had thought about in the past. And we realized that we can do them and we can do them well. And so I'm really excited about continuing those conversations and those efforts to really sort of meet people where they are today. And I think that's one of my feelings about where I feel the church is called and where I'm called in ministry, is to really think deeply in partnership with people of faith in our context, and to meet them where they are so that the church becomes, it resonates with them. There's a resonance with what we do as a community, both on a personal level, but also on a community level. So I'm really excited about building partnerships in our community with other communities of faith, but also just other people in our community who are doing great work and want to be in conversation around justice and education and racial justice and everything that we can be in partnership with. And so I'm excited to do that. I'm excited that we are moving toward a place where we can be more hybrid in a faith formation perspective, so that we offer things where we do together, like you said, in person with coffee hour, with Sunday school, with in-person worship, but that is supplemented with the things we do together in an online space, and that we're making available and interacting with sort of self-guidedly in our week-to-week lives. So I'm excited about all that stuff. I mean, I think one of my real struggles, and I think is probably a struggle shared by a lot of people, is like accepting who my authentic self is as I express it in a faithful way. And it's often, and for me, that sort of is shaped by my leadership in a congregational setting. And so I am excited as I gain more experience in ministry, as I grow closer in this particular context at Mr. Congregational Church, to feel more and more comfortable just being who I am authentically as a person of faith, and to express, all the things that come with that we all, that falls under that for each of us. And I'm just excited to, I think there's a lot of great things that we can be doing together with our families and with children. I'm excited to think more deeply about having an intergenerational sort of worship experience. That's one of my main hopes for us that we will sort of build towards. And just doing more things. I think it's important that we create resources and opportunities for families to learn how to bring their faith home and to talk about questions of faith, matters of faith with their children. I think for a lot of us, and speaking personally, even as a pastor, it's sometimes difficult to do with our children and with our families. And so I think it's important to have those conversations and to build those practices with our families. So those are all things that I'm excited about and looking forward to continuing to do at our church.
I love it. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely, and getting to know you a little bit more. I can't wait to continue to get to know you in the future. Working with you and Pastor Krista has been fantastic, and I love Mr. Congregational Church. I think that the messages and the topics and everything that it's a church that I really believe in, and I think that the work that you're doing is something that I really believe in, and I'm so happy every Sunday to play the tiniest part in making sure that the people at home get that message, and we love it, and we're really big fans of you. And I just want to say thank you for that. And everybody can find out all of the information of how to get in touch with Aidan and Mystic Congregational Church in the description of this video and podcast, wherever you're watching or listening to this. Aidan, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to leave us with before you go?
No, just thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for all that you have done for our church and our community. You say it's a small thing, but it's a huge thing that has really saved us throughout the pandemic. And it's just been such a blessing to know that what we're doing on Sunday mornings and other times is accessible for all, in large part to your help and your facilitation of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It is a small part, and what you guys do is amazing. So thank you, and I'll talk to you on Sunday.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben.
See you soon.
Take care.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, please go check out Mystic Congregational Church. Aidan and Pastor Krista, Pastor Aidan, I never call him. He literally, I had to change his name at the bottom at the beginning, because when he signed in, he'd put it in, it just said 8. Like, it's the vibe of who these people are. They're incredible. They're amazing. Please go check them out. And if you know any other faith leaders or anybody else that would fit the mold of this show, please let me know, because I would love to chat with them. We'll see you guys next Sunday on Teacher Talks.